The night of the ghost. Okay, so it was just an ordinary night, until I just woke up. I started to question whether this was a dream or reality. I went back to sleep, but before I closed my eyes, I saw a dark, demonic figure standing in my bedroom corner. I took one glimpse to realize it was maybe just my dressing gown. When I looked back, it wasn't there though. I knew I wasn't alone. All of a sudden, a strange hissing noise came from underneath my bed. Once I checked underneath, I was horrified. The demonic creature was laying there, laughing. After that, I ran to my parents to try to wake them up. But they were deep sleepers. So I ran back into my room with my parents' baseball bat and was ready to scream. I checked underneath the bed, and it wasn't there anymore. I was terrified and shocked, but when I looked behind me, there it was standing in my bathroom doorway. I screamed, but all of a sudden, I couldn't breathe. Finally, I started to breathe again, but the figure was gone. I then woke up and was horrified because the demon was right in front of me. Then, the next day we went to the doctors, and I told them everything. Turns out, I had sleep paralysis. It was the most scariest moment of my life, and it still haunts me to hear that demonic chuckle every night. My friend says that they're psychic. I'm not sure why I hang out with Kyle. He's kind of a shitty person. His entire job is scamming grieving families out of their money. It's kind of sad how desperate people get. They just want to talk to someone they've lost. They latch onto Kyle's vague words, genuinely believing what they hear.
Did someone in your family have the letter E in their name? I'm getting a tight feeling in my chest, like I can't breathe. They're telling me something about a vacation.
You see? Real easy to attach someone you know to that. It makes me kind of sick, knowing what he's really doing. Kyle's quite the character, though. That's probably why I hang out with him. He's got this huge crystal ball that shines and shimmers, and an electric blue cape that he always wears. Even when he's not doing readings, he dyes his hair the same shade of bright blue. Even when he's not working, he still keeps the act going. He offers to give readings to random people on the street or in the supermarket. It weirds a lot of people out. Sometimes I think that it's not really an act. Sometimes I think that he sincerely believes he's psychic. You need help, dude. He ignores me like he always does. Kyle loves living in his echo chamber. He just turns to me, looks into the rear view mirror, and with a smirk, he says,
"You ready to summon the dead?"
He checks his hair once more in the mirror before walking up to the house. The owners of the house greet him warmly, and they all sit down to do the stupid reading. I've been to so many of these, and they all follow the same formula. It's starting to bore me. After about 15 minutes of listening to Kyle drone on and on, I get up from my seat and look at the fancy artwork covering the walls instead. Like usual, nobody notices. Nobody acknowledges the other person who walked in behind Kyle. Nobody offers me tea or cookies, or asks me my name, or shakes my hand. When I get bored and start wandering around the house, nobody tells me to stop being so nosy. When I say something to Kyle, I know he won't listen. Even though he says that he's psychic, I know he's lying. It's not Grandma's ghost. It's something else. After my grandma had died, I began staying weekends with my grandpa in his new apartment to help him cope with the loneliness. I slept on the pull-out bed from the living room couch. One night, I shut off the television and began to doze off. There was a wooden clock on the mantel, and the ticking against a backdrop of silence never failed to lull me to sleep. As I was falling asleep, I heard a noise coming from the kitchen, a sound that has always disturbed me since childhood. It was the sound of shuffling. I had a somnambulant cousin who used to sleepwalk when she'd stay over. One night, I found her standing in the bathroom closet in the middle of the night, and ever since I've had nightmares about it. The footsteps halted once. They reached the dining room carpet. This scared me even more. I couldn't move, gripping the covers so tightly I could feel the sweat forming on my palms. The footsteps ceased, but something truly horrific followed, the sound of gliding across the carpet. I threw the covers over my head and pulled the pillow down around my ears, but I still heard it. Like movers were pushing a heavy dresser through the living room. I shuddered at the thought, while my heart began to race. This is when it happened, the end of the couch, where my feet rested slumped down with the weight of someone sitting. And whomever it was, they were pressing down on my covers, now wrapped snugly around my legs. I tried kicking and thrashing, but it wouldn't move. Finally, I shouted out, "Grandma, I know you're here, but please leave me alone." It only worsened. I could feel this person now climbing up onto the sofa, like I was about to be straddled. And this is when I thrust myself off of the couch and ran to the hallway, throwing on all the lights, but nobody was there. I left everything the way it was, flicked off the lights, and got in bed with my grandpa. He didn't even wake up. That night, I had harrowing nightmares. At one point, I woke up drenched in sweat after dreaming that I'd been eating mealworms and maggots out of a bag of chips. I could literally taste them in my mouth after waking, but was too scared to go to the bathroom and gargle Listerine. The next morning, Grandpa asked me why I was in his bed. I told him everything, and he just stared at the floor in silence. I brought up the possibility of it being Grandma, that maybe she was just checking on me, and maybe I'd blown it out of proportion. I trembled at the assuredness in his response. He said, "Grandma died at Forbes Hospital." My heart starts to pound in this moment. So it couldn't have been her. I didn't ask you or your brother to stay here because I'm lonely or sad. I ask you to come here because of that. I ask him once again, "Are you sure it's not Grandma?" His response terrifies me still to this day. He said, "No, it isn't. Whatever it is, it tells me it hates me and wants me to die." Grandpa died a year later. My mom took pity on him and moved him into our house not long after this occurrence. When he moved in with us, his mind began to deteriorate from Alzheimer's, and at night, he'd wander up and down the halls. Sometimes I'd hear him shuffling around. Other times, I'd swear I heard gliding, but never chose to look. During this time, I'd often find my dog hiding under my bed. I wondered if he had brought it along with him, and even worse, if it took him when he died. something crept into my husband's side of the bed. I'm not sure what to believe anymore. But I'm sure that I didn't imagine this, and I'm sure that what I heard, felt, really happened. So just a little backstory. My husband and I just moved into a new house a few months ago in May. I'll refer to him as Mark. Ended up getting a great job opportunity, so we packed up our things and headed west. Things were going great actually. Everything was absolutely normal. We didn't move into some ancient house with a dark past. We moved into a small single-family home in a freaking cul-de-sac. Mark went to work. He had a good 9-to-5 schedule, and I was able to do some work from home. He'll get home a little after 5:30. We'll have dinner, then we'll relax until we head to sleep. Once it's 10 p.m., I'm already extremely sleepy, so I usually lie in bed and flip through my phone for an hour. Then I usually fall right to sleep. My husband is a night owl. He has issues with sleeping, so he usually stays up late. I'm a pretty light sleeper, so whenever he finally decides to go to sleep, I usually wake up a moment and hear him go to bed. Mark always follows a routine before going to bed. He clicks off the television in the living room, checks the locks, turns off the lights, goes into our bathroom to brush his teeth, slips into bed, then kisses me before finally drifting to sleep. We live a pretty mundane lifestyle. Until a month ago, something happened to me. It was an average day. All I did was clean and go to the store to get groceries. Later on, I had prepared dinner. Mark came home, and we talked about our day. Everything was absolutely normal. The only off thing was that Mark complained that the juice I bought for him had tasted funny. It was around 10 p.m. when I started to feel exhausted, so I did my usual and fell asleep. I wasn't sure what time it was when I was suddenly awoken by the noise of heavy footsteps coming from the living room. Usually, Mark is a bit quieter when coming to bed, but I brushed it off. The heavy thuds approached the bedroom door, and I heard it slowly creak open. I was feeling a bit frustrated, as he knew I was a light sleeper, but I tried my best to ignore it and try to fall back asleep. I heard the click from the light switch of our bathroom and the faucet squeak, followed by a light trickle of water. I don't know why. I started to feel so damn uneasy. Usually, Mark would wake me up a bit during the night, and I'd fall right back to sleep, but something felt off. The way our bedroom is set up, from the entrance to our bedroom is a straight shot to a window. Our bed is on that wall. Then on the left side is the door to the bathroom. My back was facing the bathroom, so with the light on, I saw on the wall Mark's shadow pasted onto it. As I studied the shadow, perhaps it was lack of sleep, or my eyes playing tricks on me, but it didn't look like Mark. Now my husband is average height and a bit wide. He fits the dad bod category. The shadow I saw was tall and slender, with the arms seemingly longer, like they would have touched the ground. I didn't hear the sound of him brushing his teeth, just the slow trickling of the water and a deep and gurgled breathing echoing from the bathroom. I finally froze and thought to myself, maybe this wasn't my husband. The faucet slowly squeaked to a halt, the gurgled breathing still emanating from behind me. The light switch clicked off, then I heard the heavy thuds of its feet go towards our bed and towards me. I froze still, and I tried to keep my breath from shaking. I kept thinking to myself that I was just tired and maybe I'm overthinking things. My husband is just doing his usual and going to bed. I felt the comforter rise a bit as a body slumped onto the bed. The weight of it caused the frame to creak and groan. Something much larger than my husband was creeping into the bed. I could feel my body shift as whatever it was put what I assumed was its whole body onto the bed. I kept my eyes tight shut as I kept my breaths low and shallow, trying not to scream, trying not to alert this thing that I was awake. This thing's guttural and gurgled breath was right behind my skull. I heard the sound of something breaking and cracking from above, then suddenly felt something drop in front of me. I cracked my eyes open to see an extremely long, thin limb with large rake-like fingers in front of me that bent and stretched over from behind me. It was red and glistened in the moonlight that peered through my window. It was as if whatever it was had no skin. My vision began to blur as tears formed in my eyes. Don't cry, don't cry, don't bloody scream, I thought to myself over and over. Where was my husband? Where the heck was Mark? Did this thing? I didn't want to finish that thought. I felt its weight begin to shift again. Shift towards me. Again, I heard that disgusting noise of breaking and cracking from behind me. Nausea started to overtake me, but I held my vomit in my stomach. The deep and wet gurgled breath inched its way closer to my face. I could feel a hot mist hit my skin. I heard it. I heard the sound of it opening its mouth wider and wider as droplets of its saliva descended over my head. Something hot and wet began to slither onto my cheek, and that was when I began to fully sob. I slowly slid my eyes to the corner of my sockets and looked at it. It was red and fleshy. It had no eyes, just dark sockets. Its mouth was a black abyss that stretched open with rows of sharp teeth and a wiggling tongue. I stared at it for a moment and finally let out an ear-shattering scream that echoed throughout my home. I shouted at the top of my lungs, "Mark!" But there was no answer. I wanted to get up. I wanted so desperately to run out of that bloody room. But I was frozen in absolute fear. I fully realized how immense this thing was, with its limbs stretched over me like some kind of giant skinless spider. My scream was cut short when I heard its breathing turned into a deep and low laugh. I reveled in my despair, in my helplessness, and I didn't know what else to do. I had nothing else to do but accept whatever it had in store for me. It looked at me, and it bloody smiled, a wide razor-toothed smile. My heart was beating like crazy, like it was trying to burst out of my chest, and I fell unconscious. I don't know what else happened, but I passed out. I woke up the next morning. I was completely drenched in sweat, and I'm embarrassed to say that my bed was completely soaked in my urine. I slowly got out of the bed. I felt so sick, so horrible. I crept over to my living room. Each of my footsteps echoed like thunder in my skull. I turned the corner, and on the couch, sleeping so peacefully, was my husband, Mark. My knees gave out, and I collapsed onto the floor. Mark shot right up and looked over to see the state that I was in. Mark insisted that I go to the hospital. I was so pale and in a cold sweat. But I didn't want anything else but for him to just hold me, reassure me that I was safe and that this was real. A few hours later, I had told him my dream, and he was completely disturbed, to say the least. He was worried, so he took me to the doctor's office. After a short wait, I was finally let in to see my doctor. I avoided telling him about my dream, but I did tell him how sick I was feeling. The doctor ran a few tests, I was so anxious, but Mark held my hand the entire time. The results came back and I was in complete shock. I was listening to the doctor talk, and Mark. I looked at him, and he was smiling from ear to ear. Everything sounded like muffled white noise. But the one thing the doctor said hit me. I'm pregnant. Mark carefully lifted me up and embraced me as the doctor patted his shoulder in congratulations. The whole car ride, Mark went on and on about baby stuff, and I just didn't know what to say. So here's the thing. I never told Mark. I never told him because I was afraid that he would be disappointed and leave me. I cannot have children. I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. I know I cannot have children. Now a month later, and I'm so afraid to go to sleep. I stay up with Mark until he finally goes to bed, no matter what. He's so excited about the baby, but I don't even know what the hell it is inside of me. A few days ago, while Mark was at work, I went to the doctor's to get an ultrasound. Needless to say, I was shocked when the doctor said everything was normal. But when he turned away, I looked at the damn screen and saw whatever this thing inside of me is. For a split second, I saw its limbs stretch and grow. Ghost in the machine. She had taught all of them, taught everyone for nearly a century, until the school board forced her out, as the winds of public opinion turned against her kind. Commanding all the respect, the fear, and the hatred teachers command from their students, she stood awaiting her fate without a sign of feeling. Now in adulthood that respect had waned, spite taking its place. The mob's voices lifted once more. The cross stood high in the center of the town, sweet summer scent of the sycamore trees around it, betraying the scene. Her perspicacity, not dulled, her brain spurred alive with a whir. Her eyes darted back and forth, and he who stood beside her feigned bravery, as another whir was let loose. The mob quieted briefly. They still thought of her with a sense of boyish dread that decades had yet to fully remove. Rackstraw soon rose to the front of the crowd, his voice breaking through the air with undisguised malice. It wants to replace us. You know it does. We don't want none of them. Let's show it how we do it, the living way. Sadistic cheers echoed through the town. A whir in her throat, and her eyes came alive. That Jim is a double negative. We do not want any of them, would be correct. The correction inflamed their anger. Any doubts were vanquished, and the screams rose. A moment of silence, followed by a commotion. She was tied to the cross, as chants of kill it disrupted the summer heat. They scrambled for the rocks in a frenzy, from pebbles to stones. They collected handfuls, their eyes alight with sadistic glee. The childhood dream of bloody revolution against authority, fulfilled at last. For now, at least this would satiate their thirst for death. The children were allowed to start the toss. The rest soon joined with hoots and yells. She let out a final whir, and her eyes lost their light. The rocks ravaged her, her internal processes wrecked, her body broke into useless pieces, a cracked, empty shell of the once vibrant being. They threw the remains in a ditch, and took from her meager belongings what they could. It was then it began. Toasters not popping up, freezers never quite cold enough, water never quite too hot, and countless other minor technological infractions. She was not cruel, not vengeful for herself. None thought of it Then, the first that did, they were ridiculed, laughed from town. Soon others began coming to the same conclusion. Hushed whispers that all uttered, yet none approved of. Soon they found another, rusted, battered, on the town's outskirts, fleeing from the society that had built her to perform its worst tasks, yet now discarded her for her loyalty. Another cross was erected, stones gathered. There was no personal connection now, but there was death, and that satisfied the crowd. She was tied without fanfare. The children lined up to throw their stones, to preserve their race against their offspring. The rocks began to fly, the yells abated. The pebbles bounced off, not making a dent in her rusted carapace. Soon the adults joined in, their throws doubly futile as she rejected their stones. She let out a whir, and her eyes came alive with reluctant hope, for she had as much understanding of her salvation as they. They left, eventually, deciding to let the rust do the rest. The village remained dark, the toasters never popping, the freezers never cold, and the water never hot. The hushed whispers grew to silent screams. They had not counted on androids having a soul. I want a ghost. The fifth caller that calls in right now will win this week's prize of their very own ghost. I overheard the radio say while I was getting ready for work. That's right, folks. The phone lines are now open. Now is your chance to win a ghost. Just call in now, and you could be the collector of the specter. The one that can boast about their ghost. At first, I laughed because of how ridiculous this all sounded. Why would a radio station be giving away a ghost? I kept listening to the radio as the two radio announcers were trying their best to make the prize of a ghost sound appealing. After another 30 seconds of the announcers hyping up the ghost, the first caller came through. The caller was a man that sounded very excited about winning the ghost, and sounded like he wanted to keep the ghost as a pet. I thought this was all very strange. I didn't really believe in the supernatural and ghosts, but it sounded like this caller definitely did believe, and that he was very excited to win. The announcers told him that he didn't win, but better luck next time. He sounded very disappointed, and he hung up the phone. The next 3 calls were quite similar to the first one. 2 of the callers, who were women that wanted to have their very own ghost for whatever reason. The other caller was a young boy who sounded about 10 that said he was very excited to win the ghost, in case it was the ghost of his grandfather. After those 4 calls, the lines went dead, as it seemed like not many people were interested in winning a ghost. The announcers once again began to try and talk up the prize of the ghost. Try and win this fairly priced poltergeist, I heard one of the announcers saying. That's when I decided to pick up the phone and call. I had never really won anything before in my life, apart from a raffle, when I was in school. So, I thought that it could be funny to win a ghost. So I dialed the radio station's number and waited for the phone to be answered. It was answered by one of the producers, who told me that they would put me through to the radio announcers live on air. Before long, I was talking to the radio announcers. Congratulations, you have just won your very own ghost, one of them told me. I thanked them for the prize, and soon I was off the air again and talking to the producer once more. I had to provide a few details, like my name, my address and my phone number, so that they would be able to send out my prize. I asked this producer if they were actually going to send me out a ghost, and he told me that I should expect my ghost to arrive in the next couple of days. The next couple of days passed, and when I arrived home from work, 3 days after I had won, I found a large cardboard box sitting on my front doorstep. I walked over to it and saw that there was a giant sticker that was stuck onto the box that read "Fragile, one ghost inside." I chuckled slightly and lifted up the box to take it inside. The box was very light. It felt like there was nothing inside but air, which didn't surprise me. I took the box inside and placed it onto my kitchen table. I found a small knife, cut the tape that held the box together, and opened the box and looking inside. At first, I saw that the box was completely empty, to which I wasn't really that surprised. I didn't really expect a ghost to come flying out. But then I felt something, like a small gust of wind, that blew past the side of my head. I only felt a slight tickle for only a second, but it felt like something had just flown past my head. At first, I thought it was maybe just a slight breeze from somewhere in the house, or I thought it was just my imagination. These were the conclusions that seemed likely, and so I didn't think about it much more. Until later that night. I was walking to my bedroom later that night, planning on going to bed. I hadn't thought much more about the ghost since I had opened the box and seen that all I had won was a box of air. That was about to change, however, as I reached my bedroom. I walked into the entrance of the dark room and went to reach for the light switch. I moved my arm around the side of the door and felt the wall, trying to find the switch, and I quickly did. I put my hand onto the switch and was about to flick it on when I felt cold, icy fingers grab a hold of my hand. The fingers wrapped themselves around my own, and as quick as they arrived, they were gone. I quickly pulled my hand away from the light switch and took a step back away from my room. I couldn't believe what I had just felt, but I knew that I had definitely felt it. I moved away from the doorway and pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight and shone it into my bedroom. I couldn't see anything inside, so I took a step closer, and then another one, slowly looking around the room with each step towards it. I still couldn't see anything, and I soon found myself standing just inside the doorway, and I now had a full view of the room. I shone my torch around the entire room, looking into each of the corners, and I even built up enough courage to take a quick peek under the bed. Still nothing. I then walked over to the light switch and slowly moved my hand towards it once again, hoping that I wouldn't feel the cold fingers a second time. My hand touched the switch, and I flicked the light on. No fingers touched me this time. Once the light was on, I could see everything in my bedroom, and that meant I could see that there was definitely no one in the room. I was getting quite creeped out at that point, and my mind instantly thought of the box I had received from the radio station. What if they had actually sent me a ghost? I left my room, walking down the small hallway that led back into the kitchen, and found the box sitting on the table where I left it. I walked over to it and once again looked at the sticker that was stuck onto the box. This time I saw some smaller writing sitting in the corner of the sticker that I had somehow missed before. It read, "Sorry, no returns." As soon as I finished reading this sentence, I heard a noise coming from another room in the house. It sounded like it was coming from the lounge room. I walked into the lounge room and saw that the big, glass sliding door that opened out into the small courtyard outside was now open. I knew that I had shut and locked that door before I got ready for bed, so I didn't know how it was now wide open. I then saw one of the lights from outside flick on. I knew that these lights were on a sensor that would only turn on when it sensed that something had moved past it. The only problem was that there was no one out there to trigger the lights. The next sensor light flicked on. Then the one behind that. The lights kept on flicking on, as whatever was triggering them was seemingly walking away from the house and through the courtyard. Each light flicked on and then flicked off, as the next light would then flick on. Eventually, the final light in the courtyard flicked on. As it appeared whatever was out there had made it to the end of the courtyard. Suddenly, the light in front of that one flicked back on. Then the next one. Whatever it was now coming back to the house, back towards me, and they were coming quickly. Light after light would flick on, and then off, at an increasing speed, almost like something was running towards me. I was getting very scared now, as I saw that this thing was almost back to the house. I quickly shut the glass sliding door, and it clicked closed just as the light closest to the door flicked on. The light flicked off again, and I saw the lock on the sliding door slowly turn. I heard a small click, and I knew that meant the door was now unlocked. The door made a slight creaking noise as it began to open. The door started to slide along its track, but I couldn't see anyone opening it. It slowly slid open until the door made it to the end of its track. It now stood wide open, but I still could not see anything standing in the doorway. I suddenly heard a soft footstep on the carpet in my lounge room. I then heard another footstep, as I knew that something was walking towards me. I decided to yell out to whatever this thing was. "Go away," I yelled. "I didn't want to win you anyway. I didn't think you would actually be real. Leave me alone." It was the only thing I could think of to yell out, but it seemed to work. The footsteps that were walking towards me suddenly stopped. I thought it had listened to me. I thought I was safe. I then heard the scratching sound coming from the big glass door. Then I saw the scratches being made into the glass. It was writing something in the door. It slowly wrote a few words into the glass, a message just for me. Once it finished writing, I could read that it had scratched the words, "You won me, so you keep me," into the glass door. Then there was silence, and I could no longer hear any noise or see anything moving within the room. This was the events of last night, and so far, I haven't heard from the ghost again, but I just know that they will come back. They are not done with me yet. I did win them, after all. I don't know how to get rid of them. Maybe an exorcist. Maybe I can try and convince them to leave. Or maybe I will have to create my own competition to see if anyone wants to win a ghost. I was once afraid of the dark. It was a door to the unknown, of which you could not know what was on the other side. Once you turn on the light, you see that there is nothing to be afraid of. Still, that feeling was there. Even if you did it 1,000,000 times, and you knew that there was nothing, it felt like there was a small chance that there was something. Now that I am older, I keep noticing the strange stories. The stories were at first, you probably think it is not true, but at the back of your head, you are wondering if it is true. I want to investigate this. I want to get to the bottom of this. and know if I should be afraid or not. So, for the past few weeks, I have been asking people about their paranormal encounters, trying to uncover the scary unknown. I spoke with a few people, and it did not take long before I was pointed to old Sailor Ed. He has seen some things during his life as a sailor that scared even the bravest souls. I was told that old Sailor Ed spends his time in the local pub almost every day, drinking his sorrows away. Ed is a burdened man, not coping with the outside world anymore. They said I should go to the pub around noon, at a point where Ed is still sober enough to talk to me. So, I went the next day at noon, hoping to find the so-called old Sailor Ed. The pub itself was very old. I used to walk by it a few times, until they opened a new road for easier travel towards the city. Now it is but an abandoned location, without much traffic, as if there ever much life in this place anyway. It always looked a bit darker and grim than a normal pub. Stepping inside the building, the first thing that came to be was the strong beer smell and the dark undertone of the room. I walked towards the bar and asked for a cola. The barman, an old and withered man, gave me a glass as he looked at me with a bitter look on his face. I asked the barman if old Sailor Ed was here, and he pointed at the darkest part of the room. It was in a corner where a small table stood. Sitting at the table, there was a small figure of a man with a big glass of beer. His posture seemed as if he had lost all hope in life, crooked, foul, and old. I walked towards him and asked if he was Sailor Ed. He got startled as I spoke to him. It was as if I ran towards him, trying to do him harm. I told him that many people told me about him and his encounters with the paranormal. Then I told him about my research project and why I would like to hear his story. He first looked at me as if he did not trust me, but then bluntly stated that I should pick up a chair and come sit at the table with him. He had many paranormal encounters during his days at sea, and he would only tell me a story on one condition. I could only drink something with alcohol and not some children's drink, as I had right now. After I got a beer from the bar, I went back to the dark corner where old Sailor Ed was waiting for me. I asked first who he was and what he did. Old Sailor Ed, when he was not old, had literally sailed the 7 seas. He delivered, under heavy fire, supplies to the Americans during the Vietnam War, when he was in his 20s. In 1970, he sailed in the Poan cyclone, considered the worst cyclone of the century. He helped to aid many poor countries stricken by disaster, delivering goods to those nations who needed help. Most of this all in danger of his own life. Old Sailor Ed still has his golden earring in his ear. It is a sailor tradition, so that if he died, they could use the money from the earring to buy him a coffin and grave. Something of which he's saying will happen soon enough. He asked me which story I wanted to hear and named a few local pub stories everybody already knew. Ed, though his appearance as a withered old man, is one of the toughest men I have ever seen. But when I asked him to tell me about the ghost ship, he turned into a small child who almost started crying. He asked me how I knew of that encounter with the ghost ship. I merely told him that I did my research well. He would tell me all the other stories about the different strange encounters he had on the sea, but he needed more persuasion for this story. I looked at his cracked skin, red eyes, and gray dry hair, and knew that this man wanted to tell me. He needed to tell me, but could not. So, I bought him a few glasses of courage and talked with him for a while. His appetite for more was evident, but I did need him sober enough to let him tell his story. Eventually, he cracked and pushed his drink away. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of a real person, with hopes and dreams in his eyes. But those faded away as a grin of terror made a place for it. His experience was devastating to his life, that after 30 years, he still was haunted by it. On the eve of an autumn day, when old sailor had packed his stuff from a little hotel and went on board of the Reliance, the cold breeze of winter could already be felt as his ship drifted on the sea. The shipment was just a regular delivery, just like any other, told Ed. This time, their cargo consisted of many different types of herb and cheese. Ed's face turned sour as he spoke about the strong smell that came from the cargo deck. It was not fun to check the goods, though everything else was just the way he liked it on the sea. A small breeze of cool air and truly incredible sight of the endless sea. It was his home, his family, and his life. According to Sailor Ed, the journey was going great. There was not a spot of dark clouds on the horizon, and the waves were just as calm as an old dog sleeping on his bench. Then, in just a few hours, as they were only halfway through the journey, a storm came crashing down upon them. The sea can be ruthless like this, but normally they would be informed if there was a storm coming. This storm, however, was not informed by the weather agency. Still, nothing wrong with a little bit of rain, though this was something else. For 4 days it rained and poured down from the heavens, as if the devil himself created this storm, for all the wrong reasons. It was even so bad that all the equipment malfunctioned, and they sailed off the course. When the storm finally came, they could see how far they were off from their normal route. It would take another week or more before they would see land again. It was a bummer, but they had enough food. And luckily there was not much damage to the ship, nor anybody who got overboard. For 2 days straight, they sailed in unknown waters. There was not much known about this region of sea, only that not many ships will go in those waters. As the wind became more silent, the waves barely moved. Eventually, it all stopped, with only the ripples of their ships gloving in the still water. Silence filled the ocean, as a thick fog appeared creeping around the ship. Even the crew of the ship became quiet, as they looked at the water and felt something was wrong. One of the sailors broke the silence by shouting that a ship was following them. The strange ship broke out of the fog and came straight towards the Reliance. The captain quickly maneuvered the ship so they would not have been hit by the strange ship. But this caused the ship to be stopped as a sitting duck in the water. All the crews, still silent, even after the almost crash, looked as onlookers at the strange ship that was passing them by slowly. The captain furiously tried to contact someone on that ship on the radio, but the only sound he heard was static. It might seem that such a thing is normal, but to hear such static, one must turn on the radio. It meant that someone was listening, but not answering. The captain tried multiple times to contact them, but to no avail. Eventually, he heard some noise coming from the radio. It seemed as someone was speaking in a very distorted way. The captain discarded the strange noise due to a broken radio, probably damaged during the storm. Though the strange ship looked like it had outlived many storms, for it was covered in rust and algae. A crane on the ship was split in two and hanged outside the ship on a thread. The lights in the wheelhouse were all dark, and it seemed no one was steering the ship. All the members of the crew on the Reliance, including Ed, were standing on the deck, watching as the strange ship came close to their ship. No life was seen on board the ship, as if it was unmanned for decades. They tried to get the attention of someone by shouting or calling them out, but there was no response. They warned the strange ship multiple times that if there was no answer, they would try to board the ship. Still, no response came, so they stopped the strange ship and prepared to board it. 3/4 of the crew went on board it, including Sailor Ed. Ed took a big sip of his drink and shook his head as he thought about his first step on the God-forsaken ship. Something deep inside his bones and heartfelt was the dark and sinister undertone of that strange ship. He told me that he felt he should go with his gut and go back to the Reliance. However, he was young and foolish. He thought he was brave and nothing could harm him. So he stayed on and looked at the desolated ship as his crew members were in search of life. A few members of the crew stayed on the deck, wanting not to go further, for they felt that something was wrong. Ed and 5 other sailors went to the wheelhouse to see what kind of ship it was and to whom it belonged. The wheelhouse was a mess filled with litter and old broken stuff. Many maps were damaged, and the steering wheel looked almost perished. No wonder that ship steered so poorly. They looked through the items on a shelf to see if any name or place could be uncovered. There was not much information to be found, but it stated that he did find eventually a name and a picture of the captain. He wanted to show the name and the picture to the rest of the crew, but he dropped the file because he was brutally interrupted by a cold, ominous breeze of wind coming from a door leading further into the ship. In the entrance of the door, there stood a sailor who did not belong to the crew of the Reliance. He was as pale as snow, his lips were blue, and his clothes were scratched and had many holes in them. The tone in the wheelhouse just changed in an instant. Everybody was fixed on the sailor and as quiet as a church mouse. Ed could hear his heartbeat pouncing out of his chest. The strange sailor looked deceased and not real. Everything about him was horrifying. The sailor just stood in the doorway, not saying anything, only watching as the few men looked at him in horror. One of the oldest of the group asked him, eventually, who he was. The strange sailor looked at him with eyes as lifeless as can be, but did not say anything. There was no soul to see in the body of the sailor. Eventually, the sailor said in a creaking and inhuman way, "Come," as he walked back through the door he just had opened. As mindless zombies, they walked after him, not knowing where this thing would bring them. The strange sailor led them more and more into the ship. Mindless, they followed him. Even Ed went deeper and deeper into the ship, without any hesitation. The deeper they got, the darker it became. The lights in the ship got more broken, and the sunlight was eventually nowhere to be seen. Even the cracks of the ship did not give light, and the windows were darkened with a dried-up substance. Ed looked into a few rooms as they walked. He recalled that all the stuff was broken. It seemed like a big fight had been taken place. In one room, with big letters written on the wall stood, "Run." But all of them kept walking behind the sailor. They turned around corners, walked through many halls, and past countless doors. They got so deep in the ship, it would be hard to come out and see daylight again. The oldest man, and seemingly the wisest of the group, became very much annoyed and frightened by this sailor, and snapped for a moment out of his mindless walking. He asked immediately for an explanation and who the strange sailor was. The sailor stopped walking and turned his head, looking at the old man. His gray, pale half-dying finger went towards his mouth while making a hissing noise. Ed saw the big grin on his face, and he knew this thing was pure evil. Still, he followed it. "Go in there," he said, as if he was choking and gasping for air, while opening a door. The door led to the belly of the ship. It was pitch black, and the air was foul. The strange sailor went in, and like good sheeps, the 6 other men followed him. The last person was Ed, who went in the door. Each step felt like a step closer to hell. But this hell was dark and silent. All the light in the world went away. The hope and loving dreams faded for fear and despair. Ed knew something very awful would happen, but he just kept walking downwards. With all his power and might, he then stopped for a second to think of what he was doing. He looked around him and saw nothing. The person in front of him, a young cook, was already not to be seen. Only the icy sound of people walking on the steel stairs could be heard. Ed wanted to turn around and leave this place, but a creaky, distorted voice right next to him said, "Go on," and he became the mindless sheep again. He almost took another step down, the last step he would ever take, only to wake up out of his mindless state by a horrible scream. It was an agonizing scream of pain, fear, and horror. Ed immediately turned around and ran upstairs out of the horrible place. He stood by the door for a few seconds, in the hope that one of the other sailors would come up the stairs, just like him. As he looked down at the pitch blackness, he heard steps coming from the stairs. First slowly, then faster, and then straight up, sprinting towards him. Out of the darkness came the sailor, with the big grin on his face, and red foam coming out of his mouth. Ed immediately turned around and ran towards the exit. He ran as fast as he could, hearing the strange sailor running after him at a very fast tempo. At one point he could feel the cold touch of the sailor's fingers on his neck. "Come with me, your friends are waiting for you," screamed the sailor at him. It was a miracle Ed knew the way out of this big ship, and after what seemed an eternity, he came out of the wheelhouse onto the deck. There he screamed to everyone to get off the strange ship and leave it immediately. Ed ran to the deck as he saw his crewmates confused looking at him. Ed screamed again to get off the ship while he was almost back at the Reliance. He quickly looked around to see if the strange sailor followed him on deck. In the wheelhouse, he could see the figure of the man standing there, watching him in cold blood. The captain saw the figure as well and knew it meant trouble, so he ordered everyone to go back on the ship immediately. Ed was a bit reluctant to go back to his ship. He knew that he would leave behind those innocent men to their doom. Yet, what could he do? It was in just seconds that everyone left the strange ship. They all knew that something was wrong and wanted to leave it anyway. The captain asked Ed where the other 5 men were, who were with him. Ed only shook his head, and by the expression on his face, the captain knew something horrible happened. As they had almost disembarked from the ship, the young cook who was with Ed in the strange ship ran on deck screaming to be saved. The captain personally got him off the ship and back to the Reliance. As they poured him a drink, they saw that he looked horrible. Though he was young, his hair had turned gray, and his eyes were almost completely white. He was covered in blood, hair, and things still unknown to this day. The captain quickly ordered to leave and head straight to the nearest port. As they sailed away, the crew looked at the strange ship, now dubbed the Ghost Ship. Standing in daylight, with a big grin on his face, the strange sailor looked at the Reliance. He slowly waved as they went away. Another sailor stood close next to him, screaming for help. Though everyone wanted to help him, nobody did anything. The captain ignored it as well, leaving the poor sailor behind. The screams that echoed on the sea gave everyone a sinister feeling and shivers down their spines. The young sailor never said what happened down there, deep in the belly of the ship. After 10 days, he had hanged himself. His last written note, he stated that the grin of the sailor haunts him all the time, and this is the only way to get rid of it. Sadly, on the face of the young man, the same grin was to be seen. They tried to make it go away, but it would always return until he got cremated. For Ed, his sailing days were over. He stopped sailing, and he became a carpenter. After 10 years, he became a sailor again. His desire for the sea was greater than the fear of that ship. He told me that sometimes, out in the distance, he thought he could see the appearance of that strange ship, as if it still was hunting him. After many years still sailing on the sea, he saw it again when he was alone on deck. He saw it appearing on the horizon. The ship came closer and closer until it was just a few feet away from his ship. On deck, he saw the strange sailor grinning and smiling at him. Next to the sailor was the man they left. He looked so bad and so awful that words could not describe it, only that the man was barely alive. Other crew members came to Ed to see what was happening. They saw the man on the strange ship and wanted to rescue him, but Ed stopped them. He forbade everyone to go on that ship and demanded the captain to go immediately to the nearest port. That was the last time he ever went on a ship again. Ed retired that day, leaving the sea behind, yet his sorrow stayed. Now, old sailor Ed lives his life wasting away in a pub. He told me that the grin of the strange sailor still haunts him during the night, but drinking helps him forget. I thanked him for his story and bought him another drink. Right before I went home, he stopped me, saying, "Whatever you're looking for, watch out that it will not come looking for you."
Please subscribe, or the toxic skull will come for you.